Hey guys, I'm Saurabh. In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 tips for low light portrait photography. I already made a video about portrait photography. I would recommend you to watch that. The link will be in the description below. I'm again collaborating with Shutout and we are again hosting a portrait photography contest where you can win lot of cash prizes. The details of the contest will be given at the end of the video. This video is focused mainly towards low light portrait photography. In this video, I will be talking about the cameras and lenses, the lighting, the camera settings and also certain additional tips and editing to help you get better low light portrait images. I'm very pumped up for this video. Hope you are too. Without wasting any time, let's get started. First, let's talk about cameras and lenses. Talking about cameras, now it's not necessary that you should have a full frame camera, but if you have an option, go for a full frame camera. Because in low light, the full frame camera will perform better and will give you higher quality images in low light at higher ISOs. Don't misunderstand me. If you have a crop sensor camera, that does not mean you cannot get better images. With the other tips that you're going to see in this video, you can get great images no matter which camera you're using. Talking about lenses, I highly recommend to get a prime lens. Now, if you're shooting with a lens, maybe your kit lens that has an aperture of f3.5 or f5.6, something like this, it won't be very useful. If you have a lens with a wider aperture, something like a 2.8, 1.8 or even 1.4, that is going to be very useful for two reasons. First, you get a very shallow depth of field, and second, since you have that wider aperture, it allows more amount of light to come in, and that is how you get great quality images in low light. The lens I'm using in this video is the 7200mm 2.8 and the 50mm 1.4. As I said, the 1.4 will be very helpful in low light situations. Why I like the 7200 is it has image stabilization. So since the lens have built-in image stabilization, I can use that with slower shutter speed. I will explain more about camera settings later, but hope you understand what kind of cameras and lenses should you use when you're shooting in low light. The next thing I'm going to talk about is lighting. So when you're shooting in low light, there are two main issues. One is the noise. The images look a lot more noisy when you're shooting at higher ISOs. And the second issue is the lack of light on the subject. There are 4 ways to fix it. The first is the ambient light. So when you're shooting in low light, you might have different light sources available in the surroundings. You can use that. Place the subject close to the light source and get beautiful light on the face of the subject. The second method is to use a flash. Now, flash is great for low light portrait photography and you can be a lot more creative with it. I will soon make a dedicated video about how to use flash, and if you want it, stay tuned to my channel. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on that note. The third tip is to use continuous video light. Now, I shoot a lot of videos and that is why I have a continuous video light with me. Now, if you don't have a flash, I would recommend to use a video light. Now, why I prefer video light over flash is that it is always on, and I have the idea of the exposure of the kind of light that I'm going to capture. Now, it's not that it's better than the flash, but I slightly prefer it more since I have a better idea of what I'm going to shoot before clicking the shutter button. The last tip is to use the mobile flashlight. Now, if you don't have good ambient light, good flash or video light, you can use your mobile flashlight as well. Just take the mobile phone you have, turn on the flashlight and use that. Now, if you use it properly, you can have very good light and people won't be able to tell whether you used a good quality light or just a mobile flash. So that was all about lighting. Now let's talk about camera settings. I highly recommend to shoot in manual mode. Now, when you're shooting in low light, the light can be a lot more tricky. There can be a lot of highlights and shadows. And when you're shooting in manual mode, you get complete control of what you exactly want to expose. And that is why I always shoot in manual mode. The first thing I always set is the aperture. Now, it's a subjective thing. It depends on the amount of depth of field you want. But most of the times, if I want that shallow depth of field, I shoot at the widest aperture. For example, this image was shot at f1.4. Not only it helps me to get that shallow depth of field, it also helps me to get more amount of light coming in. So an aperture like a 2.8, 1.8, 1.4, something like that will be very useful. Then I set my shutter speed. Now you cannot use a very fast shutter speed because it will reduce the amount of light, and that is not what you want. You want to use a fairly slower shutter speed but not introduce any camera shake. So a good starting point would be the focal length of your lens. So if you're shooting with a 50mm, start with 1/50th of a second. If you're shooting with an 85mm lens, around 1/100th of a second is a good starting point. If you have extremely stable hands, you can also use a slower shutter speed, something like 1/38th or 1/40th of a second. Just make sure that you're not introducing any camera shake. Talking about camera shake, if your lens have any kind of vibration reduction, make sure you turn on that. So try to use a wider aperture and a slower shutter speed so that you get more amount of light. The next setting is the ISO. Now you have to be careful when you're increasing the ISO. If you're using a crop sensor camera, anything above 800 ISO is going to give you noise. If you're using a full frame camera, 1600 or 2000 ISO is totally fine. I understand that increasing ISO will give you much more noise, but that can be dealt up to an extent when you're post-processing. Don't keep the ISO less and shoot an underexposed image, because if you're later trying to get that exposure in post-processing, the image quality is just going to be worse. The last setting is the white balance. Now, I will always recommend you to shoot in RAW, and when you're shooting in RAW, you can obviously change the white balance while post-processing. But it is better to set the white balance when you're capturing the images so you get a better idea of what kind of images you might end up with. Obviously, RAW will give you that flexibility, but try to get it perfect in camera so that you have to do less work while editing the photos. So this was all about camera settings. The next tip I'm going to talk about is using a tripod. So as I said, when you're shooting with a slower shutter speed, you can introduce some camera shake, and to prevent that, tripod is a great option. So when you're shooting with the tripod, you can use a slower shutter speed like 1/20th or 1/30th of a second, and that will help you to not increase the ISO a lot to get a proper exposure. Now, using a tripod might feel like a small tip, but believe me, when you're shooting in low light, tripod is going to be extremely useful. Now, this was all about the shooting part. Try to get creative with different light sources and try to introduce some kind of foreground and better composition, and you will get great images. Since we are done with the shooting, let's talk about the editing part. Let's jump to Lightroom for that. So this is not going to be an in-depth editing tutorial. Mainly I will focus on three things. The first thing I'm focusing on is the white balance. So as I said, while I was shooting, I felt this was the proper white balance, but when I later came home, what I saw is it's a bit warm. So I'm going to dial in a cooler white balance. Something about 2700 looks good. So once I'm happy with the colors, the next thing I'm going to focus is noise reduction. So when you're shooting in low light, you might be using a higher ISO. Now this was shot at ISO 800. So if you see, there's a bit of noise and we are going to remove that. Now the noise reduction process also depends at which ISO you're shooting. So for different ISO, it will be different. But since I'm shooting at ISO 800, I will tell you what I'm doing. I will set my sharpening to about 70, and then I will use the luminance at about 25 to 30. So once the amount and the luminance are set, the next thing I'm going to do is masking. So I'm going to hold the Alt or Option button and I'm going to pull down the masking till I have the areas which I want to be sharpened. Okay, all the black areas you see will not get sharpened. So all the noise that is there in the parts, in the black parts, will actually be completely gone. So that will help to remove the noise. So if I toggle this on and off, you will be able to see the difference. Let me zoom in for you. Now, if I toggle it on and off, you can see the noise is gone, but we have maintained that sharpness. The next thing I'm going to focus on is bringing attention to the subject. Now, I have done some basic editing here, and now I want the attention to go directly to the subject. So what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to use a radial filter and I'm going to make a circle around her face. Okay. So this looks fine, and then I'm going to increase the highlights a bit, so about 15, and shadows just a bit, about +5. So as if I toggle this on and off, you will be able to see the difference. I'm not playing with the exposure, I'm just dealing with highlights and shadows, and this depends on the kind of image and the kind of light you have on the subject. You can play with exposure if you want, just a bit. So now since I have done this, I will make a new radial filter. I will just cover the subject and I will make sure the invert option is not checked. So everything that is actually not in the circle will get affected. Okay. Make sure the feather is 100 so that the changes look a bit more gradual. Then I'm just slightly going to decrease the exposure. So I'll just increase the size of the circle. And then when I toggle this on and off, the edges get a bit more darker and the attention now directly goes to the subject, and we have our before and after. So I hope you understood how to shoot and how to edit low light portrait images. Now if you want to make some money by participating and winning contests, as I said, I have collaborated with Shutout for a portrait photography contest. You can post photos and basically there are two kind of entries, free and a premium entry. The premium entry is for about $2, something like 140 or 150 rupees. The thing is, the more number of participants, more will be the cash prize. So just by spending about 140-150 rupees and submitting your portrait images, you can win a lot of cash prizes. A bonus for all my subscribers is that when you submit your premium entry, then you will get a Shutout premium account that will be starting at the year 2019. With the help of the premium account, you can submit 5 photos per contest. You can also create your own contest, and when you do that, you will earn more money. So it's a great place. Visit the website. The link will be there in the description and also in the top comment. Make sure you participate in the contest, and all the best for the competition. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot for watching it. If you liked it, press the like button. If you loved it, press the subscribe button if you haven't already. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.